Few things are more frustrating than starting out on a journey, only to realize that you don't clearly know where you are going. Or if you do, finding out that you don't know exactly how to get there. The first of these concerns is fairly rare in real life. It isn't often that you hop on a plane without a pretty decent idea of where you are flying. But the other happens pretty often. Sometimes you might hop in a car or start walking to class, only to realize you don't know exactly how to get there. If you live out in the boonies like I do, or among the mountains that cling to most of Colorado, you might find yourself in a bit of a fix, where you have no service on your phone and wonder how anyone found their way around without the internet. Artistic journeys are not altogether different. The biggest difference there is that not everyone knows they are on one, and many people that do don't know their destination or don't have one in mind. Of course, like in the rest of life, it's fine to just wander peacefully through the artistic experience, enjoy the scenery, and whatever it is that might come your way. But if you have somewhere you would like to go, if you have something you want to achieve, there are few things better than a well-laid plan. Well, my name is Zach, and welcome to episode 94 of the podcast. And please forgive me for my voice. I have spent 2 weeks struggling with a sore throat, and I'm finally trying to get ahead on video recording again. In this episode, I am revisiting a topic that I've talked about in brief before: planning out your artistic journey, or said another way, plotting the best path to achieve whatever it is you want to do with your art. This is a difficult topic to talk about, and every time I do, I feel like I learn a little bit more, but it's also just generally a struggle because there are so many different ways that you can come at this. So if it feels like I get a little rambly or I use a lot of examples, just understand that the reason I'm doing that is hopefully to just hit the right area for you who are listening. Obviously, the path to become a concept artist is going to be dramatically different than the path of becoming a professional portrait painter. And also the very fact that you might be starting this journey at 18 versus 45, you might have a 1-year time span in mind or a 15-year time span in mind. Those things are going to dramatically affect this. But as usual, I'm going to explore what I mean by the topic and then go over how this is going to affect you as an artist. Then I'll have some closing thoughts and updates at the end. But as we get started, what manner of art goal lies before you right now? What is it that you are actively seeking, or perhaps just desiring? Let us know in the comments below, and if you have to, think about it for a while as you listen. So the first thing I want to start with is, do you really need to be on a journey as an artist? I like to start at these kinds of points because it seems fairly easy to assume that no, you don't need to do anything when it comes to your art. In a broad sense, this is true. If you are making art in general, you have no obligation to make a certain kind of art, work it to a particular level of quality, or anything of the kind. You don't have to show anyone your work. You don't even have to keep it. Honestly, you could burn every piece after you finish. Unless it's a painting or it's digital, then it's probably not safe to inhale whatever you're going to burn there. I feel fairly safe in saying that most artists are not pursuing a career necessarily. Most of us are simply trying to make something interesting, cool, or something beautiful. There is likely a not-so-quiet voice in the back of most of our minds that tells us that we should work toward a career, or it's some far-off dream, or wouldn't it be cool to? But that voice is likely subdued and quiet. And of course, I am talking about generalities here. I think that a large portion of you who are listening right now, if someone walked up to you and gave you the opportunity to be a professional artist today, to simply be commissioned to make works, or to be given a patron who just pays you to make whatever your whim desires, I think most of us would say yes emphatically to that offer. That is something that used to happen back in the old days, if you will. And in fact, I just saw something about either Ireland or Scotland potentially looking at doing something similar here in the near future. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't it be wonderful to just have a government that put money and effort into the production of beautiful things for the sake of beauty? But all of those kind of loose, rambly thoughts considered, do you have to be on a journey? No, of course not. However, I firmly believe that for most of us, having a solid, definable goal, a destination in mind, will aid us artistically in a really fundamental way. I believe it allows for more joy, for more actual progress, and it makes a potentially very abstract thing more concrete in our minds. But what does it mean to actually be on an artistic journey? I think this is an important thing to chew on because I have a tendency to speak in metaphor and allegory. It's just a part of how I interpret the world. I know sometimes it might sound like in these videos I'm trying to construct this beautiful, eloquent thing, but unfortunately, this is kind of just how I speak. I end up using metaphors randomly just in my conversations with my wife or with my close friends, and there are some times where they are just sitting there scratching their heads. This particularly got worse when I hit 30 and all of the common phrases kind of started getting tangled up in my mind, but it's not something I do to sound smarter. In fact, half the time I end up looking dumber because I have to unravel and unpack my metaphors. But sometimes we get wrapped up in this idea, the metaphor of a journey. And I talked about this a little bit at the beginning of this. So I think it's important to break that down. The artistic journey in general for most of us is simply being actively in pursuit of a thing. If somebody came to you and went, what's your goal? And what are you striving for right now? The answers that you give are going to basically be the journey that you're on. If you are working toward completing a comic, then your artistic journey is some eloquent description of becoming a comic artist. If your goal is to write a book, then the art journey you're on is that of an author. It's not particularly sophisticated. It's just, if you have a destination in mind and you are taking steps to get there, you are traveling from point A to point B. And that's really all that I mean when I'm talking about an artistic journey. So it means to be specifically oriented toward a destination, and you are taking steps to move toward that destination. There are some specific benefits of owning the idea that you are on a journey and knowing that you're on one as well. For a lot of artists, especially young artists, there is kind of a meandering path to things because they don't know specifically where they're heading. In the early years, this is totally understandable and rational because you don't know yourself very well. You don't know the climate as it comes to the culture around art in your local area or online if you're trying to interface there. And you probably don't even know what you want. It takes a long time as humans to understand what we want out of life and where we're going. And there is some convincing debate that that's something that changes over the entirety of your life, that it's going to continue to shift and change. Sometimes I feel a little bit upset by the fact that, at least here in the United States, we try to prepare kids to go out into the real world on their own at 18, or we pressure them to go to college for an additional 3 to 4 years. And the reality is, 18 or 22, most people aren't done developing in a way where they can make decisions for the next 30, 40, 50 years of their life. And the older I get, the more I chew on that and understand that that's kind of a flawed idea. Like, you can't also baby everyone until they're 25 or 30 so that then they know who they are. Like, you have to get your hands dirty. You got to start moving and trying to work on things and understand yourself. But the old school pressure to make a decision about what you're going to do for the next 50 years when you haven't lived even half of that yet is kind of ridiculous. And the same pressure kind of exists in the artistic world, this idea that you should know what kind of artist you want to be when you're in high school or when you've just gotten into your first job or something. It's a little ridiculous, but I do think that there is an importance in trying to figure out what kind of journey you want to be on in that moment, and then slowly allowing yourself to modify it over time. So those kinds of things, that kind of groundwork laid, let's start talking about actually building a plan. And like I mentioned earlier, this is going to have to be a little bit abstract because of the nature of how this is going to apply to different career paths, to different non-career paths, because there are so many different angles we can go. So if you have questions, please fire them off in the comments below. Not that I have all the right answers, but there are going to be other people listening and watching this, and they will be able to give you feedback. I think as much as we can, trying to develop an artistic community that can help point others of like kind in the right direction is always a helpful thing. So then, how is this actually applied? In the same way that heading out your front door for a vacation is generally not advisable without some planning, the same is true for an artistic journey. There is something to be said for just starting in a direction and seeing where things take you, but again, for most of us, having a more solidified plan is beneficial. Who knows? That adventure into the wilderness of art may be what you do next, but let's start with something a little bit more solid. Dreams and desires are often a good place to start this discussion, and I've talked a bit on this channel about dreams when it comes to art, how important they are, and the strange fact that most artists seem to have them, some sort of far-off, nigh unobtainable dream. I still believe that this is an important component of what it is to be an artist. Dreams are important. They allow for hope and for reaching into the future. And these are key things when it comes to the long trek that is often the artistic journey. Your dreams, your desires, maybe even ambitions. This is where I think you have to start when it comes to any plan or journey artistically. What do you actually want to achieve? What do you want to have achieved? And what do you want to be able to achieve? This is 3 different categories, and they might actually be the same thing, but for some of us, we're going to hone in more specifically on one of these alone. And I state it this way because those are all different things, though they sound quite similar. There is a difference between being in a gallery and being happy that you were in a gallery at some point. However, for the dream or desire, it doesn't need to be super defined. We'll get to goals next, actually. This category often starts with the ability to produce art at the level that you desire. I want to be good enough to draw a comic. I want to be able to paint beautiful portraits. I want to finally be able to use Photoshop, don't we all? These are not goals. They are ethereal ideas about art and usually a wise place to start. And the reason they're not goals is, well, they kind of are goals, right? But the reason I'm not thinking of them as goals in this moment is because they're much more difficult to define. What does good enough mean? What does beautiful mean? What does use mean? You can use Photoshop in about 5 minutes if you just know how to select things, right? So the definable nature of something, I think, is going to make for a better goal versus just a loose dream or desire. For me, I want to be able to get the characters in my stories out of my head and onto the page. I want to be able to sift through ideas for my fantasy and science fiction novels by drawing out the concepts of dark towers and floating islands and space stations. I want to be able to visualize those things and create pieces that are exciting to me. These are desires and dreams. Again, the goals would be more defined components of that. My first goal for the world building, for example, would be simply to come up with a strategy for creating a world building sketchbook. Cool, I've done that. The next then might be to finish an entire world building sketchbook. The third then, which I'm starting now to lay the groundwork for, is to isolate all the components that I haven't world built yet and make sure that they're lined out for the next sketchbook. And maybe then to create a schedule so I can start pushing a little bit more emphatically moving forward. This is also probably going to come with a redefining of the categories and areas that I lack skill, so I can continue to develop those and get better as an overarching artist as I move through these things. But what about you? What are your desires and dreams when it comes to art? Don't feel like you need to share them here. You certainly can, but I would recommend that you write them down somewhere. That you write them down in your sketchbook, that you write them down on a document on your computer or in your phone or whatever. I think that you need to write them down. I've done this several times. I've done it as a bulleted list. I've done it as just a couple, notes at the beginning of a new sketchbook. I cannot overstate how important I think it is to actually write them down. Sometimes when you write them down, seeing them is a little bit embarrassing because you're prone to go, oh my goodness, who do I think I am? Do I really think you get a little bit of imposter syndrome there? For some people, it can be really invigorating to see them actually written down oh my goodness, this is what I want to do. How attainable is that? It doesn't really matter what your emotional reaction to it is. It's an important thing to get down because once something is down, it can be modified. You don't have to make something good at first. You just have to make something. And then it can be changed and chewed on and pulled apart. You can think about it while you're sipping on your tea or coffee. You can ponder what it is that you want. You can modify them. But I, again, would leave them as that rough draft and then make a second version that kind of adjusts things. What are you excited about? What do you desire? Where do you want to go? And then after you've done that, after you've written those things down, you have them in tangible form before you, let's move on to building goals. The dream itself allows for the construction of a goal, figuring out your desired destination. Once you have an idea of what you want to achieve or be capable of achieving, you can figure out a solid version of what that looks like. Let's go back to the idea just for a moment of wanting to be good enough to draw a comic. Perhaps the end goal here is simply to make a comic. That is likely too loose, so let's break it down. An 80-page comic with consistent style inspired by maybe 2 to 3 of your favorite artists in black and white. This is more solid, more understandable, and the reason why these details are important will become obvious in a moment. The next question that springs to mind for me when considering this is, when? A goal is fairly amorphous if there is no date or time on it. Now, I understand that such things apply pressure, and sometimes that pressure can make the art less enjoyable. But you know you, and perhaps giving yourself a very gracious time frame is a better idea. But in general, having a time frame of some kind allows for the journey to actually move forward, rather than sit around in the planning stages forever. Sometimes this is colloquially referred to as planning hell. It's the same kind of idea as world builder's disease, which is another idea you might have heard of. The concept that you can sit in the planning and chewing on stage of a project and never actually dive in because you don't feel like you've done enough work, when subconsciously a lot of what's happening is you are keeping yourself from doing the risky work, the work where you can actually fail on something. So maybe give yourself 3 years for this hypothetical comic. Great! Now you have a solid goal, something you can work toward and measure progress on. But it is likely still a bit intimidating. And in order to manage that, you are going to need some methods and better timeframes to scaffold the process. But before we move on, I want to take a minute here because dreams and goals are really, really important. I know I threw out a quick example, but these things can be so different from one another, it is absolutely staggering. Do not rush these parts of the process. Go for a walk, drive to work without music on and think. Try to figure out what you want, what that looks like, and pull that idea apart before you begin moving forward. In a lot of ways, this is the most crucial part of the entire thing. If you miss this, if you rush through it, if you find yourself pushing forward recklessly in the wrong direction, that can be really damaging. Take some time here, explore your ideas and your desires, and honestly, go big. Dream in a large scale at the beginning. Come up with those crazy dreams. You want to get a published novel out there, make a movie, illustrate for Marvel, it doesn't matter. Be honest with yourself before you move on to the planning process. Now, as a caveat, you might be saying, like, those are ridiculous things. Like, I'll never be able to do those. You might be right. But the reality is you don't really know because somebody will. Somebody will come into illustrating for Marvel. Somebody will make a movie. Somebody your exact age right now is working on the process to get there. So yes, statistically speaking, it's unlikely, but the reality is it happens. It happens every single day. And if you start off by having your dream, your goal, your desire, and then you cut it short, you cut it off at the knees, I think is the phrase, before you ever even give it a chance, all you're doing is guaranteeing that you won't achieve that. And sometimes you're going to have these crazy dreams and you're going to cut back on them. You know, maybe you're not actually going to make a full feature-length movie that we can go see in the theater, but maybe you'll learn animation and be able to make shorts that will still touch the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. It happens all the time on YouTube, and it's something that you could eventually find yourself doing. So let's go back to a little bit of a less abstract place now with methods and timeframes. The important thing to start with here is that whatever that big goal is, you ought to give yourself some loose manner of time frame for wanting to accomplish it, and then you have to bisect that. You have to start taking that amorphous idea and honing in on individual components and benchmarks that are going to help you along that process. When I sat down to finally start my novels, for example, and I knew there was going to be 3 of them in a row, I had no idea how long such a thing might take. So my initial goal was, I'm going to try to write this trilogy and maybe I'll try to finish it by the time I hit 50. So I'm 38 right now. I started writing the books when I was 36. The idea kind of seemed doable, right? That would have been 14 years for me to finish these. I was like, that doesn't seem too crazy. You hearing this that might sound insane. You might be like 18 or 20 years old. You're like, 14 years to achieve my thing. But again, for me, who had been chewing on this idea for 20 years, having a long-term goal that gave me a lot of grace to figure things out was the first step that allowed me to start, because it felt just a little bit less amorphous. When the idea was initially, I'd like to write a book someday, that is nothing. That's a cloud. But when you start going, I'd like to write a book by this age, and it's like, well, I got to start at some point. If I don't start until I'm 45, I only have 5 years, and maybe I'm a really slow writer. I don't know. But after about 6 months of daily writing, I had a much better idea of my writing speed, of who I was as a writer, of how I wrote. And I also had an idea of how large the novels were going to be, because when I initially started, I was like, well, Lord of the Rings novels are about 150,000 words, so that's probably about what this will be. Mine ended up being a little bit bigger. So I did not, and still do not, have a perfect understanding of any of these components, but I know that the first novel took me about 9 months to do, the second took about 10, and the third is currently about 32% done and looking to be finished in May of 2026. I have a much better understanding of that process, of what goes into it. I know how I outline, I know how I plan. And so this is the point at which I'm then able to modify that long-term goal and make it a little bit more reasonable, because I actually have the information to do it. But if I hadn't set that long-term goal, I don't know that I would have begun yet. I might still be in the process of being intimidated or thinking I have infinite time. So all of these numbers that I have now, all of that knowledge, all of that experience has been obtained from doing the work. So don't pressure yourself to have a perfect time frame or timeline at first. Just set up something and then allow yourself to modify it as you move forward. That said, it's not a bad idea to come up with some fairly concrete and more immediate goals as well. Whatever that long, big-term project is, bisect it and break it down. If you want to produce that 80-page comic, you're probably going to have the whole thing sketched out before you begin, right? Probably going to want to make sure you have the ability of doing a full page spread, a 2-page spread, of drawing your characters consistently. These are all kind of like intermittent goals that are going to have to be achieved before you can build up to that larger goal. All of these are individual components of the whole, and you can begin to break down that idea, the overarching goal, and then figure out what all of the bullet points are underneath it. This is, of course, referencing writing and going to go back to writing. Just like I mentioned earlier, I would highly, highly encourage you to write these down. And you might be able to do this at first. I would encourage you to try, but just understand that it might require some further modification. But just underneath those goals and dreams and ambitions that you're probably not going to share with anybody because you're a little bit nervous or embarrassed about them, which is totally fine. Don't stress about it. It's just part of being human. I would list these things under that. And maybe date them, write the actual date that you're writing this down, and then come back to them later. I've done this several times, and every once in a while I kind of nail it, but most of the time I'm pretty far off. I don't understand how long something's going to take, or I don't understand all of the individual components. Even when I started making videos, the process has shifted like 6 or 7 times. And every once in a while I rush through it and change everything because I'm anxious about the process. I have developed a process for making videos. I think I've done somewhere in the neighborhood of 300, 350 of them now. But still, the process is honed over time. Things get better. Some things get worse because I take too many shortcuts. This is kind of how it goes. So, you came up with your dream, then the long-term goal, then the loose overarching time frame, and then this, that you break down that larger goal into all of its constituent pieces. And once you have all of these, try to figure out which comes first, which is your biggest priority. And then you can kind of order the rest of them accordingly. So again, if you're going back to that comic and you're cutting it down to, well, if I want to have 80 pages, I got to have 60 pages, got to have 40 pages. You could do all that time frame. But you also probably have a set of skills that you need to build up to in order to actually just do page 1. And so I would start with that, kind of build out these baseline metrics, that need to be achieved before you can start kind of moving on into the bigger components of the piece. Don't sit there and fret about the fact that you can't illustrate a comic today. Just try to get one panel done that you're happy with, and then try to figure out what the process was for getting there, and then move on and try to get a second panel, and then continue just to add into those things. Each of these components that you decipher, that you ascertain are the building blocks to build toward that long-term goal, each of these becomes a small goal along the way. And each of these can then get their own time frames. I know for some of you, this is already sounding like way too much work, way too much thinking. And I'll admit, this is partly just how I process things. And I would encourage you, if you are, substantially different from me, if the idea of a spreadsheet or putting time frames on your dreams seems a little bit counterintuitive, hear me out and then try it on a really simplified form. I've known a lot of people where the idea of just having their goals and their dreams and some individualized goals bullet pointed is astronomically beneficial. And then you get people like me who are like, no, I want to set a time frame for everything because the spreadsheet makes life better. That's not everybody, I know that, but I do think that the writing down, the deciphering, basically just trying to peel back the layers to understand what this thing is that you're holding on to so desperately is always going to be beneficial. So you might be the kind of person who wants to plan like I do and bisect everything. Probably not though. Most people are not built that way. So I'm going to, not assume that you are like me. If you want me to do a podcast or a discussion exactly on how I plan everything, I can do that. But that's going to apply to just a very small group of people. Most of what I talk about here and on the channel and in general is just based on my personal experience, but primarily my personal experience with my students over the course of the 11 years that I taught high school and middle school. And I would really love to be able to go into the methodologies for achieving each of these particular components. But the reality is this is going to depend on the specifics of every single one of them. And it's unfortunately the reason why I have to talk about this in the abstract, because every single artistic journey is going to be different enough from the next one that it's going to be very difficult to break it down. If you'd like me to have a video or just a discussion at some point where I do literally just plan through an entire artistic journey, maybe not my own, but just like a hypothetical one, let me know in the comments below. I would be interested in sitting down and doing that. Might be something to chat about on the Discord server and produce something with the help of some of the other folk there to try to put something together. But the best advice I can give here is to break down all of it into these bite-sized, manageable pieces. At the very least, it makes it all just a little bit less overwhelming. And I think that's a huge thing when it comes to the methods and timeframes of achieving each of these components. Methods is a tough topic. I want to spend a long time here talking about how you can achieve each of these things individually. But I think that, again, I'm going to have to stay at kind of a high level with it. So you have taken your goal and you've broken it into all these constituent pieces that each need to be achieved. If you are looking at that list and you don't know how to achieve the first couple items on there, first of all, it's totally normal. But if you don't have a method for achieving those, I would dissect each of those a little bit further and start researching. I wouldn't put too much time into the research because it's easy to get stuck in that place of perpetually planning and not actually making any forward progress on things. But the reality is, if you get to that first little subset of a goal is just drawing your character consistently, or maybe it's designing the character. Maybe you want to make a comic, you don't even have a character yet. And your first goal is just to design a character and to sketch out / outline a story. If you're sitting there and looking at those two things, there's a good chance that you feel like you can achieve those and you can start working on those. But let's assume for a moment that you have no method in your mind yet even to achieve the absolute basic goal. And this is prudent to talk about because at some point you are going to run into something on that journey that you don't know how to do and you don't have a predefined method to do it. You're not going to be able to find a perfect class. Even if you go to art school, you're not going to have somebody who can line you out perfectly. It's just not how this stuff works. So let's assume that at that basic level, you have no method to design your character and you have no method to outline your story. The first thing I would do is I would give it an attempt. I would time yourself for whatever it is that you are going to be able to tolerate, and I would try to design your character. And it's not going to go well. It's likely if you're at this point, you want to make a comic and you don't even have a character or a story outlined yet, it's probably not going to go well. So attempt to begin with. Give yourself some grace and don't spend forever trying. Maybe give yourself a total of 10 hours to design this character, 5 hours to give an outline to your story. And after you've done that, if you are frustrated, if you're not enjoying that process, I would encourage you immediately to start doing some research. Here on this platform, go and look up like how to outline a story. You'll find dozens of videos. Again, it's really easy to get stuck in the I'm going to go consume all this content on how to do the thing, and then you don't end up doing the thing. So go find 2 or 3 videos that look good, that have some good comments, that are not super short and also not abysmally long, maybe in the 20 to 30 minute range, and save them to a specific playlist and go and watch them. Take notes, pause the video, try to concentrate on what's being said, try to absorb what you need. Google specific questions that you have on how to outline a character, how to build a character arc in. Keep researching, but each time you do, only take in a couple data points before going back and attempting again, or going back and honing that skill again. The same goes for designing the character. So make your attempt. Have a whole bunch of sketches of characters that you would consider failures, or you're just not sure quite how to do it. And then go look up a couple videos, or maybe even a couple dozen videos on how to design characters. I would encourage you though, watch one and then spend half an hour to an hour actually following what it said. Otherwise, you're going to watch 2 or 3 or 4 and feel really good about yourself and all that you're achieving, and really all you're doing is consuming content. And for a lot of us, that's going to be the biggest hurdle, is we are going to try to research, to plan, to avoid failure. And you're just going to have to understand failure is going to happen. You are going to fail at so many stages along this journey. And that's just part of the process. The only failure that really matters is the end failure, the failure where you stop moving forward. And that one is cataclysmic in a true sense. Like, it is a cataclysm to your progress because it just halts it. It stops it. You're not moving forward anymore. But you have to learn how to tolerate the small failures so that you can continue to move forward and avoid the big failures. But that would be probably my first breakdown of the methodology here. If you don't know how to do a thing, whether you run into it at the beginning or halfway through the process or right at the tail end, I would pause, do a little bit of research, and then each chunk of research, every article you watch or every movie or every YouTube video you watch, did I say like watch the article or read? I don't remember, but I think you understand the gist, right? Consume one piece of content and then attempt to apply it, as opposed to sitting there and reading several articles or watching several videos. Watch something, pause it, end it, turn off your device, sit down, and actually try to apply it. Eventually, as you're practicing, as you're continuing to work through this, you will figure out a method that works for you. And it's probably not going to be the exact method that somebody else did. Nobody else's solution is likely going to end up being your perfect solution. That's very seldom the case. It's one of those things that a lot of times when people comment on Instagram or YouTube videos about art, they want a secret sauce, a secret ingredient that's going to allow them to achieve what they want in a quick and instantaneous manner. And that's just not how it works, like 99% of the time. It's the honing of those skills. So yeah, that would be my kind of method for starting to sift through all these pieces. I would love for it to be more specific, but again, each of these journeys is so different, that's going to be very, very difficult to do. Okay, my voice is starting to give out. I'm only about 2/3 of the way through my outline. But in conjunction with my voice failing and also the fact that this would evidently end up being an hour-long podcast if I continue to go and pull apart all of the pieces, depending on editing time, I'm going to wrap it up here pretty quickly. I might continue this in a future podcast, depending on the feedback that it gets and any of the comments and those kind of things that are received. But there are a couple things I want to mention here before closing out this episode, which again might be a part 1, we'll see. The first thing is that you are probably going to take pit stops along this journey, and that's totally fine. You might hit plateaus where you decide to bench your big dream for a little while to explore something else. And I think the key here is not necessarily to avoid those, but is to really just process them. If you are trying to make that comic and you run into an absolute love for scenery and for backgrounds and things like that, skills that are going to kind of loosely apply to your end goal, but they're just a new love that you stumble into. And again, you're not using this to pay your bills, then allow yourself the time to explore those things. It's totally fine to take a little vacation from your gigantic journey. Those pit stops are things that can be really strategic and beneficial. They can actually save you from abandoning the entire journey. But most of the time, what I'm meaning here is just don't beat yourself up when you take a break here and there. And that should also be said that sometimes you're going to need to take a break, not just to do something else, but just from the art itself, from this journey, because it can be monotonous. It can be a grind. I've had to take a week off or 2 weeks off every once in a while for my writing because it just gets to be so much. Inevitably, I end up doing it with my art every once in a while too, generally after I finish a big challenge, but most of the time I just try to shift it, so I'm working on a different kind of art in the moment. And that's okay too. I think the biggest piece of advice I would give if you decide to take a break here and there is just set an alarm or a schedule of some kind so that you don't forget to come back to the work. Put some kind of reminder somewhere, or give yourself a select amount of days off from the big project and then come back to it, because it's just way too easy to set it aside and forget to come back. And that's really tragic when you look back 5-6 years down the road and you go, oh my goodness, I never finished this thing. The next thing I want to mention is reevaluating and course correcting. Don't keep yourself from adjusting things. It's easy sometimes, and we can feel like we're being a really awesome, like we're being a martyr for the cause by just being like, no, I'm sticking to my original desire. But maybe your original desire was maybe when you were 17 and now you're 24 and you're a different person. There's nothing wrong with reevaluating here and there. Maybe once a year is a good idea, and trying to figure out if you're still aimed in the right place, and maybe if you need to readjust your aim. Maybe you are aiming in exactly the same place you were, but you've come to learn some new things. You're a different person. You want to change that direction. This is pretty similar to what I was just mentioning about taking a break or the pit stops. Just allow yourself to make course corrections if you find that it's necessary. And sometimes it will be necessary. It's certainly been necessary for me a lot of times, and I'm sure if you are in the comments down below, you can agree that as an artist, you are going to adjust. You're going to think that you're going to be an oil painter and discover later on that digital art is way more your jam. One of my best friends, he's an extraordinary oil painter, but it agitates him. And so he often goes more towards digital or toward acrylic because of some of the components of that allow him to achieve what he's trying to achieve in a better fashion in the moment. And the last thing here that I want to mention is that sometimes you'll get to the destination and realize that it isn't what you thought it was. Maybe it's not as satisfying. Maybe it's not exactly what you wanted all along, but you thought you did. And this concept of like, is it really all about the journey? Now, I'm not going to spend, 35, 38 minutes of your time and sit there and be like, it's not about the destination. Like, no, destinations matter. They absolutely matter. The journey matters too. Like, both of them are components of our reality as human beings. I don't think it is all about the journey, but the journey is going to be the vast majority of the time that you're spending as you kind of go forward toward whatever goal this is. And if you can find a way to enjoy it on the way there, your life's just going to be better. If I didn't enjoy any of the writing, if I didn't enjoy any of the artwork that I'm putting down, it would be a terrible journey. And eventually, inevitably, I would give up because it's like, why keep doing this? This is not fun. This is not enjoyable. You have to enjoy some of the process. Hopefully, more of the process as you get older and you figure out a little bit more about yourself and who you are. So I just want to mention that because I know you will get people who will talk about how only the destination matters or only the journey matters. I think most of that's clickbait, honestly. Like, the journey is super important. It's the only part you can guarantee today, because you can't guarantee you'll last long enough or you'll achieve your goal. As much as you should try to continue working toward it, and I think it's beneficial. Both are necessary components and really important to this. Well, as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for bearing with my weird voice. This is a massive topic, so there's no way I covered all the pieces, and I don't think I did. I would love to talk about this in another format moving forward. So let me know what you would like me to expand on. If you would like me to dissect like a very specific thing, and I can try to give like maybe some pointers on how to design a specific plan for you. So thinking of my patrons as well, who are on the screen right now. You want to check out the Patreon or the Discord. They are both linked below. Well, have a good one, y'all. See you soon.